And for our final rule tonight, it's time for another edition of one of our favorite departments here on Real Time, explaining jokes to idiots. Where as a public service, I break down jokes for the humor impaired. Not that I have anyone particular in mind. Now, I know we're all sick of talking about the slap, but I'm sorry, one more thing needs to be said. Comedians have been under attack for quite some time, and I need to stick up for my tribe. This war on jokes must end. So tonight, let's Zapruder film this thing once and for all and explain jokes to idiots. Now, at the Oscars, Chris Rock came out to present a boring award and first did what he is supposed to do, get some laughs during what we comics call crowd work. Denzel and Javier Bardem each got spritzed. And then Chris made what in the business is known as a "some shit is like some other shit" joke. He said to Jada Smith, "Jada, can't wait for G.I. Jane 2, recalling the late 90s movie starring Demi Moore. That's it. That's the joke. You remind me of some other beautiful, buzz-cutted movie star. It wasn't an alopecia joke any more than the one about the chicken crossing the road is about bird flu."
Good morning. It is Saturday, June the 3rd, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the Star-Spangled Banner, we will have the 5, no free lunch, the rape of the mind, and I, the jury. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing and remove your hats for the national anthem of the United States of America.
Thank you. And now there's no free lunch. 250 Economic Truths by David-Bahnsen. Quote, "Moreover, an economics of growth and an ethic of restraint make for an awkward match, and the disciplining signals of the market alone are not enough to bridge the gap. we would be mistaken to assume that capitalism could produce sufficient moral authority to provide that balance on its own. Such authority would have to come from more traditional moral and cultural institutions beyond the market. And our case for capitalism must therefore also be a case for those institutions, for the family, and for religion and tradition. Democratic capitalism at its best combines the strengths of these institutions with the power of the market." Unquote. Yuval Levine. The tragedy in the way so many modern advocates of free enterprise make their case is their willful dismissal of the institutions needed to effect restraint and virtue in our market activities. Strong families, strong churches, and strong civic life is not an elective for a market economy. Deterioration in such mediating institutions will mean deterioration in the capacity of the market to effect growth, prosperity, and human flourishing. No market advocate is ever a collectivist, as Rousseauian collectivism is the great enemy of human dignity. But no market advocate is ever a radical individualist either. Rather, our individualism must place a high value on the mediating institutions of family, church, and civil society. And that was There's No Free Lunch by David-Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. Who is the true conservative? He knows that the government has no rights. He is religious. He is patriotic and uses common sense. He makes judgments, refuses to speculate, speaks clearly and definitively, and is not afraid to say no. He's open-minded, asking why rather than why not. He is consistent, credible, and influential, not ashamed of his existence, unafraid to learn or correct his mistakes. He is a normal American. Back in a minute. Thank you. What are the true conservative cultural priorities? Bring back hierarchy. Bring back the admiration of intelligence, morality, and beauty. Bring back single-income households, integration, parenting, the primacy of existence, certainty of knowledge, and universal rights and wrongs. Bring back principled behavior, masculinity and femininity. Bring back Adam 12, John F. Kennedy, the gold standard, pre-HMO medical care, and nonprofit news. Bring back civil service, the term stupid question, arguments and fights, the cultural influence of the church and the Boy Scouts. Bring back the influence of social organizations such as the Lions Club and the Rotary Club. Bring back bowling. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the rape of the mind, the liberation from magic thinking. In our Western civilization, the growth of the mass media of communication has increased the influence of collective pressures on both our prejudices and our unbiased thinking. We live in a world of constant noise, which captures our mind even when we are not aware of it. Already we have in our society the problem of the lonely, unheard voices. I am convinced that there are many wise men among us whose voices and learning would help us to correct that part of our thinking which is delusional. But their wise words are shouted down by an excess of noise from elsewhere. In our society, a man cannot simply communicate his wisdom and insight anymore. In order to be heard, he has to advertise and fortify it with megacyclical power and official labels. An organization must stand behind him and must make sure that he will rightly timed so that there will be listeners to receive his message. He must have an acknowledged label and official diploma. Otherwise, his voice is lost. To correct mass delusion is one of the most difficult tasks of democracy. Democracy pleads for freedom of thought, and this means that it demands the right of all men to test all forms of collective emotion and collective thinking. This testing is possible only if constant personal and collective self-criticism is encouraged. Democracy must face this task of preserving mobility of thought in order to free itself from blind fears and magic. The clash and mutual impact of a variety of opinions which are characteristic of democracy may not directly produce truth, but they prepare the way. At this very moment, the whole world dances around a delusion, around the magic idea that the material and military power behind an argument will bring us nearer to the truth and nearer to safety. Yet, one push of the button and the atomic missiles may lead us all to mutual suicide. In a world of warring and contrasting thoughts and delusions, the solution lies in the delineation of frontiers, of awareness of mutual limits. This agreement on what it is we disagree about is the first step to understanding. And that was The Rape of the Mind by Joost-Meerlo, M.D. Back in a minute.
President Biden falling hard in the polls, and his campaign is off to a rocky start. If only there was some kind of visual metaphor. Told him not to chew gum. But don't worry. The big guy is okay. The White House says Biden got sabotaged by a sandbag at the Air Force Academy graduation today. But the president has bigger problems to deal with, like his non-existent campaign strategy.
Mr. President, how's the re-election campaign going? Because we haven't seen you on the campaign trail yet. We haven't. Not at an official campaign rally.
Biden is also avoiding debate stages, and it's breaking the heart of that guy from Dawson's Creek, actor James Van Der Beek. Yes, that Van Der Beek, going viral with his criticism of Biden ducking the competition.
I cannot get over the fact that the Democratic National Committee is saying there will not be a debate to decide the nominee for president. Are you kidding me? Over an 80-year-old man who, if he lives, will be the oldest sitting president in the history of the country. And if he doesn't live, has a vice president whose approval rating is worse than his. This guy's obviously declining mental faculties.
I loved him in Breaking Bad. And here's why Biden should get out there more. His White House stunned to learn that a majority of Americans think he's corrupt.
What do you say to the majority of Americans who believe that the president is himself corrupt? Wow, Jesus.
Can I take that question?
The president had spoken to this.
All right, Jesse. We're going to just devote an entire segment to James Vandersluth. Beek. But I want to talk to you about the fall. What do you make of the fall? What do you think James Van Der Beek thinks of the fall?
The first fall up the stairs of Air Force One was funny. Because there was 3 falls in one.
Right.
And it's hard to fall upstairs. And then the bike fall was also funny.
Yeah.
He had a helmet, and he kind of tipped over. This fall was not funny. I wanted it to be funny. When someone sent it to me, I looked at my phone, and I expected to laugh.
Yeah.
And then I actually felt bad.
It's hard to believe.
Felt bad.
I know.
Am I maturing?
No.
Am I growing a heart?
Nah.
What's wrong with me?
You're just telling a lie on national television. You didn't feel bad.
I actually felt bad for Joe Biden because he's a jerk, but he's also not physically fit enough to be the president. He could have hit his head and Kamala could have been president.
That's scary.
We're now at that territory where this is the 3rd major fall in 2 years. And he's got 2 more years to go, and he's asking for another 4.
Right.
We're now in the danger zone, physically. And we already know that people don't think he's mentally sharp enough. People think he's too corrupt to be president. So you're going to contrast this with Trump, who's golfing, and Biden's falling, with DeSantis campaigning vigorously all over the country and Joe Biden not campaigning. You have to show effort to get votes. You have to go out there and ask for votes, to campaign for votes. That's what all presidents have done ever. So he's not doing that. He's not going to campaign. And I never thought I'd be saying this, but James Van Der Beek has a point. If you're a Democratic primary voter and you have the oldest president of all time, and he's fallen and he can't get up, you're going to want to see if he has what it takes on a stage with an RFK or a Marianne. I know she's your good friend, Greg. He said he could be wrong. He said, I could be wrong. Joe Biden could prove me wrong. He could have the chops. But to deny the opportunity of the country and the Democratic Party to make that decision feels undemocratic. Now, we were told how important democracy was. Democracy, all the last 2 years, how important democracy was. Well, the president's not debating, not campaigning, and he's going to arrest his opponent. And then the White House press secretary can't answer any questions about it. Is that democratic? That's not very democratic to me.
Wow, well done. Kennedy, James Van Der Beek might have been as big as you in the 1990s. Could he be...
Dropped out of 155, Greg. But...
Yes. But he does have a giant head. One of the biggest heads in I guess, the entertainment industry. Could that head save democracy?
Well, when you've lost Van Der Beek, you've lost a big slice of America. And I think we all know that, and we need to recognize that. Also, he had a massive forehead when he was on Dawson's Creek and in Varsity Blues. And I think the wrinkles have really helped him.
Yes.
He's sassy and sexy all at the same time. And yes, I think the president should be challenged because that's actually how Joe Biden turned things around during the 2020 debates. He had a bunch of wet mops on stage and they tried to come at him, bro, and it was not successful. Also, that debate stage should have been where Kamala Harris's political career ended. I still don't know. To your point, no one wants to see an older person fall. No one wants to see someone get hurt, especially the president of the United States with his bony concussed finger on the nuclear button. But you're right. It's because we're all terrified of a Harris presidency. So, if James Van Der Beek is going to pay us the compliment of being blunt, then why can't we do the same thing and ask, why can't we swap in another vice presidential candidate?
That is true. That is true, Dana. Were you struck by the words of James Van Der Beek?
Well, not really. Okay, so
what if it was Tori Spelling?
Oh, that would...
Or maybe Marsha Cross.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, remember Melrose Place?
Yeah. So... in 2015, Hillary Clinton would dodge debates from Bernie Sanders, but they actually had a primary that was an open seat. Okay, so both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party have basically shut down any sort of primary or debate when they have a incumbent president that wants to run for re-election. Joe Biden wanted to stay looking presidential as long as possible, but some things were happening. People were getting restless. And they weren't sure if he was actually going to run. Remember all those rumors for so long that he's definitely not going to run. He's definitely not going to run. And then they kept saying, remember he hinted all along. He's like, I got something to tell you soon. They got pushed into doing it sooner because people are concerned about his age. When I say people, I mean Democrats. Almost 70% of Democrats are concerned about his age, which means that probably 90% are concerned about it. And that means that every day Republicans should be on the campaign trail saying, if Joe Biden wins this election, every single day will be possibly Kamala's inauguration day. And try to run with that because if he doesn't want to debate RFK Jr., and I understand he probably won't, and that I understand following the historic precedent on that doesn't bother me that much.
Jessica, just imagine, hypothetically, if the nuclear button was in front of Joe Biden when he fell, he would have fallen and pressed on it, and the world would be over. Are you happy now that you voted for him?
I'm trying to think.
You just voted for the extinction of America and the world.
The world.
Yes.
You definitely stand when you hit the button, right?
Okay.
Because you could do it sitting, and then there would be low risk of there being any problems. Thank you, Dana, for explaining the precedent there with the debates, so I don't have to do that part. I'd like to talk about RFK Jr. a little bit. And I mentioned this last week. I have not met a single Democrat who is interested in RFK Jr. I've met a lot of conservatives that are hanging on his every word and talking about how this is a guy that gets it. Not one Democrat. I'm talking about normal Democrats you might meet, politico types, people who have supported other candidates, like Bernie Sanders' people who don't like Biden, who didn't like Hillary, aren't even saying RFK is the dream. Bernie's already said he's going to come out and support Biden. Now, what does that mean? That his support and Marianne Williamson's, which is about 10% right now, is people who are concerned about another 4 years of this. But there was a really interesting focus group They wrote about it yesterday in the New York Times, run by Kristen Soltis Anderson, a Republican pollster, talked to 11 disaffected Democrats who all have big concerns about Biden. Not a single one said that they would vote for Trump or DeSantis over him. So that's still a huge mountain to climb for them. In terms of the corruption point, you know, and I understand it was funny to hear Karine Jean-Pierre say Jesus really, you know, audibly, and Kirby's reaction. But this is something that, A, they're going to have to deal with and continue to push back on. But now there's so much fodder to be discussing what's going on the other side. We know from yesterday there's audio of President Trump talking about how he had a classified document about a potential attack on Iran in his possession at Bedminster, where I don't think you do any of your presidential work necessarily. That's with Jack Smith now. People are saying that it's going to be obstruction now and espionage if he ends up charged.
Espionage.
What? You think it's a joke? It's not a joke. The National Records Office reached out to Trump's lawyers on May 6th in 2021 and said, you have documents that we own. Send them back. 3 days later, we have images of Trump boarding a plane for Bedminster and boxes being carted into it.
Okay, so you can send the Iranians billions in cash in the middle of the night, but you can't have a document?
Is this
stop it?
No, you stop it.
That's espionage,
it's
but
below
this isn't.
you. That is below you. If
Nothing is below me. Nothing is below me.
How dare you?
How dare you? You know me better than that.
It's true.
He can always go lower.
It's so scary.
Jesse Waters, he can always go lower. Real quick before we go, I just want to know what went through your mind when you saw the fall.
I was scared for him. Like I would be scared for anyone. I was happy to know that at least there was a sandbag that he tripped over. But anyone who falls like that.
Oh, you believe the sandbag thing?
I believe. Okay.
You know what?
We have a president who can't walk. We had one in a wheelchair before. What do you care? He can do the job.
I'm going to wait to see what James Vanderbeek has to say about the sandbag. Right?
Yeah.
Because
Hollywood's coming for the Democratic Party with that one.
I think we're being sandbagged on the sandbag. Mm-hmm. Right?
Thank you. And now, Chapter 3 of Mickey-Spillane's Mike Hammer, I, the Jury.
Chapter 3. I dumped Velda at her hairdresser's after we ate, then headed north to Westchester. I hadn't planned to call on George Kalecki until the following day, but a call to Charlotte's office dealed that one out. She had left for home, and the wench in the reception room had been instructed not to give her address. I told her I'd call later and left a message that I wanted to see her as soon as possible. I couldn't get that woman off my mind. Those legs. 20 minutes later, I was pulling the bell outside a house that must have cost a cool $250,000. A very formal butler clicked the lock and admitted me. Mr. Kalecki, I said. Who should I say is calling, sir? Mike Hammer. I'm a private detective. I flashed my tin on him, but he wasn't impressed. I'm rather afraid Mr. Kalecki is indisposed at the moment, sir, he told me. I recognized a pat standoff when I saw one, but I wasn't bothered. Well, you tell him to undispose himself right away and get his tail down here, or I'll go get him. And I'm not kidding either. The butler looked me over carefully and must have decided that I meant what I said. He nodded and took my hat. Right this way, Mr. Hammer. He led me to an oversized library, and I plunked myself in an armchair and waited for George Kalecki. He wasn't long coming. The door banged open, and a gray-haired guy, a little stouter than his picture revealed, came in. He didn't waste words. Why did you come in after my man informed you that I was not to be disturbed? I lit a butt and blew the smoke at him. Don't give me that stuff, chum. You know why I'm here. No doubt. I read the papers, but I'm afraid that I can't help you. I was home in bed when the murder occurred, and I can prove it. Hal Kynes came in with you? Yes. Did your servant let you in? No, I used my own key. Did anyone else beside Hal see you come in? I don't think so, but his word is good enough. I sneered into his face. Not when the both of you are possible murder suspects, it isn't. Kalecki turned pale when I said that. His mouth worked a little, and he looked ready to kill me. How dare you say that? He snarled at me. The police have not made an attempt to connect me with that killing. Jack Williams died hours after I left. I took a step forward and gathered a handful of his shirt front in my fist. "Listen to me, you ugly little crook." I spat in his face. "I'm talking language you can understand. I'm not worried about the cops. If you're under suspicion, it's to me. I'm the one that counts, because when I find the one that did it, he dies. Even if I can't prove it, he dies anyway. In fact, I don't even have to be convinced too strongly. Maybe just a few things will point your way, and when they do, I'm going after you. Before I'm done, I may shoot up a lot of snotty punks like you, but you can bet that one of them will have been the one I was after. And as for the rest, tough luck. They got their noses a little too dirty." Nobody had talked to him like that the past 20 years. He floundered for words, but they didn't come. If he had opened his mouth right then, I would have slammed his teeth down his throat. Disgusted with the sight of him, I shoved him back toward an end table, in time to push myself aside far enough to keep from getting brained. A crockery vase smashed on my shoulder and shattered into 100 fragments. I ducked and whirled at the same time. A fist came flying over my head, and I blocked it with my left. I didn't wait. I let fly a wicked punch that landed low, then came up with the top of my skull, and I rammed the point of a jaw with a shattering impact. Hal Kynes hit the floor and lay there motionless. "Wise guy. A fresh kid that tries to bust me from behind. You're certainly not training him right, George. Time was when you stood behind a chopper yourself. Now you let a college kid do your blasting, and in a house full of mirrors he tries to sneak up behind me." He didn't say anything. He found a chair and slid into it, his eyes narrow slits of hate. If he had a rod right then, he would have let me have it. He would have died too. I've had an awful lot of practice sneaking that .45 out from under my arm. The Kynes kid was beginning to stir. I prodded him in the ribs with my toe until he sat up. He was still pretty green around the gills, but not green enough to sneer at me. "You lousy bastard," he said. "Have to fight dirty, don't you?" I reached down and grabbed him under the arm and yanked him to his feet. His eyes bugged. Maybe he thought he was dealing with somebody soft. "Listen, Pimpleface, just for the fun of it, I ought to slap your fuzzy chin all around this room. But I got things to do. Don't go playing man when you're only a boy. You're pretty big, but I'm 3 sizes bigger and a hell of a lot tougher, and I'll beat the living daylights out of you if you try anything funny again. Now sit down over there." Kynes hit the sofa and stayed there. George must have gotten his second wind, because he piped up, "Just a moment, Mr. Hammer. This has gone far enough. I am not without influence at City Hall." "I know," I cut in. "You'll have me arrested for assault and battery and have my license revoked. Only, when you do that, keep a picture in your mind of what your face will look like when I reach you. Someone already worked over your nose, but it's nothing compared to what you'll look like when I get done with it. Now keep your big mouth shut and give me some answers. First, what time did you leave the party?" About 1 or a little after," George said sullenly. I checked with Myrna's version. "Where did you go after you left?" "We went downstairs to Hal's car and drove straight home." "Who's we?" "Hal, Myrna, and myself. We dropped her off at her apartment and came here after putting the car in the garage. Ask Hal. He'll verify it." Hal looked at me. It was easy to see that he was worried. Evidently, this was the first time he'd been mixed up in anything so deep. Murders don't appeal to anyone. I continued with my questioning. "Then what?" "Oh, for Pete's sake, we had a highball and went to bed. What else do you think we did?" Hal said. "I don't know. Maybe you sleep together." Hal stood up in front of me, his face a red mask of fury. I put my mitt in his face and shoved him back on the sofa. "Or maybe," I went on, "you don't sleep together, which means that either one of you had plenty of time to take the car back out and make the run back to town to knock off Jack and get back here without anyone noticing it. If you do sleep together, you both could have done it. See what I mean? If either of you think you're clean, you better think again. I'm not the only one that has a mind that can figure out angles. Right now, Pat Chambers has it all figured out on paper. He'll be around soon, so you better be expecting him. And if either of you are tapped for the hot seat, you'll do a lot better by letting Pat pick you up. At least, that way, you'll live through a trial." "Someone calling me?" a voice said from the doorway. I spun around. Pat Chambers was framed in the hardwood paneling, wearing his ever-present grin. I waved him over. Yeah, you're the main topic of conversation around here at this moment. George Colecki got up from the overstuffed cushions and walked to Pat. His old bluster was back. Officer, I demand the arrest of this man at once, he fairly shouted. He broke into my home and insulted me and my guest. Look at the bruise on his jaw. Tell him what happened, Hal. Hal saw me watching him. He saw Pat standing 10 feet away from me with his hands in his pockets and apparently no desire to stop what might happen. It suddenly hit him that Jack had been a cop and Pat was a cop and Jack had been killed. And you don't kill a cop and get away with it. Nothing happened, he said. You stinking little liar. Colecki turned on him. Tell the truth. Tell how he threatened us. What are you afraid of, this dirty two-bit Seamus? No, George, I said quietly. He's afraid of this. I swung on him with all my 190 pounds. My fist went in up to the wrist in his stomach. He flopped to the floor, vomiting his lungs out, his face gradually turning purple. Hal just looked. For a second, I could have sworn I saw a satisfied leer cross his swollen face. I took Pat by the arm. Coming? I asked him. Yeah, nothing more to do here. Outside, Pat's car was drawn up under the covered portico. We climbed in, and he started it up and drove around the house to the graveled driveway to the highway and turned south toward the city. Neither of us had spoken until I asked him, Get an earful back there? He gave me a glance and nodded. Yeah, I was outside the door while you were going through your spiel. Guess you laid it out the same way I did. By the way, I added, don't get the idea I'm slipping. I was onto the tail you put on me. What did he do, call from the front gate or the filling station where I left my heap? From the station, he answered. He couldn't catch on to why the hike and called for instructions. By the way, why did you walk 1.5 miles to his house? That ought to be easy, Pat. Colecki probably left instructions not to admit me after he read that piece in the papers. I came in over the wall. Here's the station. Pull up. Pat slid the car off the road to the cindered drive. My car was still alongside the stucco house. I pointed to the gray-suited man sitting inside asleep. Your tail. Better wake him up. Pat got out and shook the guy. He came to with a silly grin. Pat motioned in my direction. He was on to you, chum. Maybe you'd better change your technique. The guy looked puzzled. On to me? Hell, he never gave me a tumble. Nuts, I said. Your rod sticks out of your back pocket like a sore thumb. I've been in this game a while myself, you know. I climbed into my buggy and turned it over. Pat stuck his head in the window and asked, You still going ahead on your own, Mike? The best I could do was nod. Nats, what else? Then you'd better follow me into town. I have something that might interest you. He got in the squad car and slid out of the cinders to the highway. My tail pulled out behind Pat, and I followed him. Pat was playing it square so far. He was using me for bait, but I didn't mind. It was like using a trout for bait to catch flies as far as I was concerned. But he was sticking too close to me to make the game any fun. Whether he was keeping me from being blasted or just making sure I didn't knock off any prominent Joes whom I suspected, I couldn't say. The article in the paper didn't have enough time to work. The killer wouldn't be flushed as quickly as that. Whoever pulled the trigger was a smart apple. Too damned smart. He must have considered me if he was in his right mind at all. He had to consider the cops, even if it was an ordinary job. But this was a cop killing, which made it worse. I was sure of one thing, though. I'd be on the kill list for sure, especially after I made the rounds of everyone connected with it. So far, I couldn't find anything on Colecki or Kynes. No motive yet. That would come later. They both had the chance to knock off Jack. George Colecki wasn't what people thought him to be. His finger was still in the rackets. Possibilities there. Where Hal came in was something else again. He was tied up in some way. And maybe not. Maybe so. I'd find out. My thoughts wandered around the general aspects of the case without reaching any conclusions. Pat went through the city sans benefit of a siren, unlike a lot of coppers, and we finally pulled up to the curb in front of his precinct station. Upstairs, he pulled open the bottom drawer of his desk and drew out a pint of bourbon from a lunchbox. He handed me a man-sized slug of the stuff and set up one for himself. I poured mine down in one gulp. Want another? Nope. Want some information? What were you going to tell me? He went over to a filing cabinet and drew out a folder. I noticed the label. It read, Myrna Devlin. Pat sat down and shook out the contents. The dossier was complete. It had everything on her that I had and more. Well, what's the angle, Pat? I knew he was getting at something. Are you connecting Myrna with this? If you are, you're barking up the wrong tree. Perhaps. You see, Mike, when Jack first found Myrna trying to go over the railing of the bridge, he treated her like any other narcotic case. He took her to the emergency ward of the hospital. Pat rose and shoved his hands in his pockets. His mouth talked, but I could see that his mind was deep in thought. It was through constant contact with her that he fell in love. It was real enough for him. He saw all the bad side of her before he saw the good. If he could love her then, he could love her any time. I don't follow, Pat. I know Myrna as well as Jack did. If you smear her all over the papers as a #1 candidate for the hot squat, you and me are going to have it out. Don't fly off the handle, Mike. There's more to it than that. After she was released, she made Jack promise not to follow it up any further. He agreed. I know, I cut in. I was there that night. Well, Jack held up his end to her, all right, but that didn't take in the whole department. Narcotics comes under a separate bureau. The case was turned over to them. Myrna didn't know anything about it, but while she was out, she talked. We had a steno taking down every word she said, and she said plenty. Narcotics was able to snare a ring that was operating around the city, but when they made the raid, there was some shooting, and during it, the one guy that would have been able to spill the beans caught one in the head, and the cycle stopped there. That's news to me, Pat. Yeah, you were in the Army then. It took a while to track the outfit down, nearly a year. It didn't stop even then. The outfit was working interstate, and the feds were in on it. They laid off Myrna when they went into her history. She was a small-town girl here in the city to break into show business. Unfortunately, she got mixed up with the wrong outfit and got put on the stuff by one of her roommates. Their contact was a guy who was paying for protection as a bookie, but who used the cover to peddle dope. His guardian angel was a politician who now occupies a cozy cell in Ossining-on-the-Hudson. The head of the outfit was a shrewd operator. No one knew or saw him. Transactions were made by mail. Dope was sent into post office boxes very skillfully disguised. In each box was a number to send the cash to. That turned out to be a box somewhere, too. That I couldn't figure. Pat turned and sat down again before he went on, but I beat him to it with a question. Something screwy, Pat. The whole thing's backwards. The stuff is usually paid for in advance, with the peddlers hoping they come through with enough decks to make money on it. Pat lit a butt and nodded vigorously. Exactly. That's one reason why we had trouble. Undoubtedly, there's stuff sitting in post office boxes right now, loaded to the brims with the junk. It isn't an amateur's touch either. The stuff came in too regularly. The source was plentiful. We managed to dig up a few old containers that hadn't been destroyed by the receiver, and there were no two postmarks alike. That wouldn't be hard to work if it was a big outfit. Apparently, they had no trouble. But we had operatives in the towns the stuff was sent from, and they went over the places with a fine-tooth comb. Nothing was turned up. They checked the transient angle since it was the only way it could have been done. Buses and trains went through these towns, and it's possible that the packages could have been dropped off by a person posing as a traveler. Each place was used once, so there was no way of telling where the next one was coming from. I get the picture, Pat. Since the last outfit was pulled, have they found any other sources? Some, but nothing they could connect with the last. Most of it was petty stuff with some hospital attendant sneaking it out of stock and peddling it on the outside. So far, you haven't told me where Myrna comes into this. I appreciate the information, but we're not getting any place. What you've given me is strictly police stuff. Pat gave me a long, searching glance. His eyes were screwed up tight, like he was thinking. I knew that look well. Tell me, he said. Hasn't it occurred to you that Jack, being a cop, could have welched on his promise to Myrna? He hated crooks and sneaks, but most of all, he hated the dirty rats that used people like Myrna to line their own pockets. So what? I asked. So this. He was in on things in the beginning. He might have been holding back something on us. Or he might have gotten something from Myrna we didn't know about. Either he spoke up at the wrong moment, or he didn't. But somebody was afraid of what he knew and bumped him. I yawned. I hated to disillusion Pat, but he was wrong. Fella, you are really mixed up. Let me show you where. First, classify all murders. There are only a few. War, passion, self-protection, insanity, profit, and mercy killings. There are some others, but these are enough. To me, it looks like Jack was killed either for profit or self-protection. I don't doubt but what he had something on someone. It must have been something he had known all along and suddenly realized its importance. Or it was something he recently found out. You know how active he was in police work, even though he was disabled and attached to the job with the insurance company. Whatever it was, he apparently wanted to make a choice. That's why you heard nothing about it. The killer had to have something he had, and killed to get it. But you searched the place, didn't you? Pat agreed with the movement of the eyes. And there was nothing removed, was there? He shook his head. Then, I went on, unless it was something Jack had outside, which I doubt, it wasn't a killing for profit. The killer knew that Jack had some poop, which would mean exposure or worse. To protect himself, the killer knocked Jack off. Self-protection. I picked up my battered hat from the desk and stretched. Gotta blow, pal. Since I'm not on an expense account or a salary, this is one job I can't afford to lose time on. Thanks for the try anyway. If I turn anything up, I'll let you know. How long after? Pat said with a smile. Just long enough to keep the jump on you, I shot back at him. I fished for a smoke and pulled a wreck of a butt from my pocket, waved so long to Pat, and walked out. My tail was waiting for me, trying to look inconspicuous in a crowd of cigar-smoking detectives in the anteroom. As I stepped outside, I flattened myself into a niche in the brick wall. The guy came out, stopped, and looked frantically both ways up and down the street. I stepped out and tapped him on the shoulder. Got a light? I asked, flipping the ancient butt between my lips. He turned beet red and lit me. Instead of playing cops and robbers, I told him, why not just walk along with me? He didn't quite know what to say, but got out an okay. It sounded more like a growl. The two of us ambled over to my car. He got in, and I slid under the wheel. And there was no use trying to talk to the guy. I couldn't get a word out of him. When I hit the main stem, I went down a side street, past a little hotel. After I pulled up in front of it, I got out with my tail right behind me, went through the revolving door, kept right on going until I was outside where I went in. That left my tail still in the door. I bent down and stuck a rubber wedge I had taken from my car window under the door and walked back to the car. Inside the door, the cop was pounding on the glass and calling me dirty names. If he wanted me, he had to go out the back door and around the street. I saw the clerk grinning. That wasn't the first time I'd used his hotel for that gag. All the way downtown, my window shook like it would fall out, which reminded me that I'd better get some more wedges in case I was tailed again.
And that was Mickey-Spillane's Mike Hammer in I, the Jury, Chapter 3. Back in a minute. Thank you. I'm Ron, your host and the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all of the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. And until next time, be honest, be smart, be beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.